My business partner stole my patent and told me to stay quiet. So I waited until the big investor pitch, called him out in front of everyone, then gave the signal to kill the demo right as he was about to close the deal. The lights in the ballroom were blinding. Every camera pointed at the stage, every smile looked expensive and fake. The big screen behind the CEO flashed the words, "Introducing Polaris, the future of predictive logistics." Polaris. My invention, my blood, my 18 months of nights and weekends. But the name on the patent filing wasn't mine. It was Ethan Cross, our CTO, the golden boy, the liar. I stood near the back of the Denver Marriott ballroom, clutching a glass of water I hadn't touched. My hands were steady. I had to be. In about 5 minutes, the demo would start, the one built entirely on the code I wrote. And hidden inside that code was something Ethan didn't know existed. Something that was about to ruin him in front of every investor and journalist in the room. He thought he had locked me out when he revoked my credentials 2 months ago. He thought I'd cry, maybe quit. But I had left him a gift, a quiet little trap nested inside the model. I called it Echo. When the demo began, it would run smooth as always until the third test case. That's when Echo would wake up. It would trigger the hidden sequence I had hard-coded months earlier. And then, in front of all those smiling parasites, the screen would light up with the message I wrote in secret, buried in the math itself. I didn't want revenge when I built it. Back then, I just wanted proof, a way to protect my name. But standing there now, surrounded by champagne and fake laughter, I realized proof wasn't enough. I wanted everyone to see him burn. Ethan was glowing under the stage lights, tall, immaculate, every hair in place, his Rolex flashing like a signal. He gestured to the audience with that fake humility he'd perfected. "This is the culmination of years of teamwork," he said, his voice smooth as static. "Polaris isn't just a product, it's a revolution." A revolution I built. My name, Maya Reed, Senior Data Scientist, Northbridge Systems, wasn't anywhere on the slides. Not in the deck, not in the press release. He'd even cut me out of the patent filing, my provisional patent, and replaced me with 2 junior engineers who owed him everything. I'd found out 3 weeks ago when I was locked out of the legal drive. "Routine permissions update," the IT notice said. Right. Like someone accidentally deletes a name off a federal patent filing. I wanted to scream then, but I didn't. I started building instead. Collecting commits, logs, Slack messages. The real paper trail of who did what. But it wasn't until I saw the internal memo, the one labeling the predictive engine cross-score, that I realized the theft wasn't accidental. Ethan had rewritten history. He had killed me off on paper before the product even launched. The ballroom lights dimmed again. Ethan smiled and snapped his fingers. "And now," he said, "let's show you what Polaris can really do." The big screen flickered. The crowd leaned forward. My trap was humming quietly beneath it all, buried inside the heart of his stolen demo. I checked my watch. 2 minutes until the third test case. 2 minutes until the truth detonated. And that's when I saw her, Lena, standing at the edge of the crowd, our compliance officer. She shouldn't have been there. Her eyes locked on me for half a second, just long enough to send one message. "They know." My stomach dropped. What did she mean, they know? Had someone found Echo, or was Ethan one step ahead of me again? The projector whirred. Ethan laughed. The second test finished. I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1, and then the screen went black. The first time I met Ethan Cross, he was standing in front of a whiteboard covered in equations he didn't understand. He was tall, tanned, and confident in the way only someone born with generational money can be. He didn't code. He sold ideas. Vision, he called it. He used words like disruption and scalability the way normal people use oxygen. I was 30, freshly promoted, still believing merit could outrun manipulation. Northbridge Systems had just landed its biggest government logistics contract in decades. My team was tasked with building a predictive model that could forecast supply chain disruptions before they happened. That model would later become Polaris. It started as my idea, the one I pitched, diagrammed, and prototyped in a freezing conference room at 2 a.m. one night. I even called it Echaroot back then, because it didn't just react to the world, it listened to it. Weather, traffic, consumer sentiment, shipping delays, it predicted movement before it happened. I spent months building the first architecture from scratch. I named the core process after my dad, the Reed loop, because he taught me how to think like an engineer when I was 10. He used to say, "Don't just fix what's broken, fix what's about to break." That's what Echoroot did. It fixed what was about to break. Ethan joined 6 months later, fresh off a keynote where he called himself a serial product builder. He was a walking LinkedIn post. The board adored him. Within a month, he was promoted to CTO. Within 2, he was reviewing every major project, including mine. The first red flag was subtle. He started asking for simplified versions of my architecture diagrams. "Investors need clarity," he'd say, tapping the whiteboard like it was his. "They don't care about the details, Maya. They care about the vision." Simplify meant delete. Simplify meant erase my name from everything. Then, during an all-hands review, Ethan presented the model to the board. My model. He called it Cross-Core Predictive Framework. The room erupted in applause. He never mentioned me, not once. I stared at the screen, the slide showing my architecture in the same color palette I used. Even my variable names were still visible. Every data flow, every layer. He'd literally taken screenshots of my work and pasted them into his deck. I wanted to walk out right then. But when I looked around, no one met my eyes. My team knew. They just didn't want to die with me. The next morning, I found my access revoked from the patent folder. "IP governance update," the IT email said. When I messaged Ethan about it, he replied within 2 minutes. "All good, legal's just restructuring permissions. Focus on mentorship, Maya. We'll need you to train the new hires for the next phase." That's when I realized I was being benched from my own project. A week later, I found out from a summer intern, a kid named Ben, still naive enough to think the system was fair, that Ethan had filed the provisional patent. He'd done it with Ben and Talia listed as co-inventors. My name wasn't anywhere. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I just stared at the email chain until my vision blurred. Ethan didn't just steal my code. He rewrote the company's history. And the worst part, he was good at it. By the time I tried to appeal to HR, I was already the burnt-out engineer who'd been graciously given time to mentor others. It was a perfect trap, one I didn't even see closing until it was too late. So I built my own. At first, it was just documentation, Git logs, hashes, server timestamps. But the more I dug, the more I realized how deep Ethan's fingerprints went. He'd reassigned Jira tickets, altered version histories, even rewritten email chains. He wasn't just stealing. He was laundering my intellectual property through other people. That's when I started working nights, quietly, obsessively, building something new. Echo, a dormant trigger embedded deep inside the core model. It looked harmless, a leftover variable, a dummy parameter called alpha. But if the system ever received a specific seed, one only I knew, Echo, would awaken and broadcast my encrypted signature across the model's output layer. In other words, the algorithm would literally spell out who built it. I thought I'd never need to use it. Until tonight. Because tonight, I wasn't just here to watch Ethan gloat. I was here to watch him choke on the truth. But if Lena's look meant what I thought it did, then someone, maybe Ethan himself, had already found the trap. And if he had, then I wasn't walking out of that ballroom clean. After the patent filing, my life at Northbridge turned into a slow deletion. My calendar, once a mosaic of meetings, deadlines, and stand-ups, was suddenly white space. My one-on-ones with Ethan, postponed indefinitely. The Aurora review meetings, rescheduled without you. It was textbook exile, corporate assassination by omission. HR called it a pivot. They said I was too valuable to be stuck in development. They wanted me to lead the new mentorship initiative. Translation: stay busy while we bury you. Ben and Talia stopped talking to me, not out of malice, out of fear. I'd see them whispering with Ethan in the hallway, their faces pale and tight. Once, I caught Talia's eyes across the cafeteria. She looked guilty, like she knew what was happening but couldn't afford to care. I worked in silence. 12-hour days doing documentation and training materials for a system I wasn't allowed to touch. They'd stripped my credentials from the repository. My code, my blood, was now behind a firewall labeled with someone else's name. And then I found it, the line of code that made my stomach twist. Buried deep inside the production branch was a new function Ethan had added. Except it wasn't random. The seed value he used was mine. The same number I'd hidden inside Echo months earlier. He had copied my model so blindly he'd left my fingerprint in his version. It was still listening, dormant, waiting for my signal. That was the moment I realized he hadn't just stolen from me, he'd armed me. I started planning. I spent nights pulling archived commits, matching every SHA hash to timestamps from the server logs. Each one showed the same thing. My user ID committing 94% of the core logic. Ethan's commits were documentation tweaks, variable renames, presentation decks, cosmetic changes, the kind that make thieves look busy. But proof isn't power, not in this world. I needed leverage. I needed a moment so public, so irreversible, that no lawyer or PR firm could spin it away. That's when I found out about the launch party. The email came from marketing. Formal unveiling of Polaris, Hyatt Grand Ballroom, March 12th. Press, investors, and board in attendance. They'd even booked a jazz trio and a LED countdown clock. I stared at that email for a long time. That clock wasn't counting down to Ethan's victory. It was counting down to his execution. But I couldn't just crash a party and yell, "He stole my code." Nobody would believe me. The company narrative was already written. I'd be escorted out before dessert. So I did what I do best. I built a system. First, I recorded my own demonstration. A video of the algorithm responding to my private seed and printing my encrypted watermark. Then, I hashed it, timestamped it, and uploaded it to 3 separate encrypted vaults. Next, I created a PowerPoint slide, just one. At the top, Polaris intellectual lineage, engineering versus filing reality, 2 parallel timelines. Top, my commits, my architecture logs, my Git hashes. Bottom, Ethan's filing dates, legal drafts, and Slack messages. 2 stories that didn't align by 6 months. Then I made 3 identical USB drives, one for me, one for an ally, and one to disappear if things went wrong. I needed that ally. Someone inside the machine who still believed in evidence. That's when I reached out to Lena, our compliance officer. She was sharp, moral, and already on the edge of burnout. I sent her one text. "Ever seen a forged federal signature? Check the patent metadata." She didn't reply for a day. When she finally did, it was 3 words that changed everything. "Meet me offline." We met in the parking garage beneath Northbridge, surrounded by concrete and silence. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She handed me a manila envelope. Inside was the as-filed copy of the patent, filed 2 days before my access was revoked, signed by Ethan Cross, Ben Keller, and Talia Morno. And below them, in perfect, looping cursive, Maya Reed. My name, my signature. A forgery. Lena's voice shook when she said it. He didn't even use the company's cryptographic signature system. He typed your name in Word and printed it. I remember staring at that line for what felt like forever. Not even angry, just hollow. He'd turned me into a ghost so easily, but ghosts can still haunt. Lena looked at me then, terrified. "You can't go public, Maya, not yet. He'll bury you. Let me talk to legal quietly, please." I promised her I'd wait. But when she walked away, I already knew I wouldn't. Because I'd just discovered something else in that envelope. Something Lena hadn't noticed. At the very bottom of the filing metadata, under technical specifications, was one innocuous line. Alpha must be set to 0.4132 for model stabilization. He'd stolen my trap. He'd copied the fuse, and tomorrow night, in front of every investor, he was going to light it. Lena called me the next morning, voice trembling. "Maya, we have a problem." She never said problem unless it meant catastrophe. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, staring at the forged patent printout she'd given me when I answered. "You mean another problem?" "No," she said. "This one's worse. Ethan didn't just forge your signature, he backdated a second version of the patent, filed it under a shell entity." I blinked. "A shell entity?" "Yeah," she whispered. "A Delaware LLC named Cross North Analytics. Registered 2 months ago. The mailing address is a WeWork office that doesn't even exist anymore." For a second, I couldn't breathe. He hadn't just stolen my work, he'd been planning to steal the entire company's IP. If the deal went through under Cross North Analytics, the patent wouldn't even belong to Northbridge anymore. It would belong to him. Personally. Ethan was laundering millions in intellectual property through a fake startup. My stomach turned cold. "He's trying to sell Polaris to investors under a different corporate identity," I said. "Exactly," Lena said. "He's setting up a private acquisition. Once the round closes, Northbridge gets scraps, and he walks with the real code." For a moment, I just stared at the window, watching snow drift down over Denver. It was the kind of silence that feels like pressure, like the world itself is holding its breath. "He's not even hiding it," Lena whispered. "He filed the second version from his corporate laptop. I checked the metadata. The same machine he uses for board meetings." I rubbed my forehead. "Does legal know?" Her answer was instant. "They can't. If I go through official channels, it's flagged as a potential investor conflict. Compliance can't even investigate without board authorization. He's locked it down. You and I are the only ones who know." We sat there in silence, both of us understanding the same thing. If Ethan pulled this off, not only would he erase me, he'd own everything. "Then we go outside the system," I said quietly. "Maya, he wants to use the launch as his final transfer point, right? Investors, press, board, all eyes on him. That's when we hit him." She hesitated. "You're talking about exposure." "I'm talking about truth," I said, "and you already know the truth doesn't survive in private." I could hear her breathing through the line, short and scared. Finally, she said, "If you're going to do this, you need to make it bulletproof. If it's not airtight, he'll spin it as sabotage." "I already made it bulletproof," I said. "He filed my trap." She didn't understand at first. So I explained. I told her about Echo, the watermark hidden in the math, the seed value, the embedded ID, the line that would light up the moment the algorithm ran live. I told her how he'd copied it blindly, and how the trigger now lived inside every version of his cross-core model. And when I finished, she went dead silent. Then she said one sentence that made my pulse spike. "Maya, what if he already knows?" "What?" "There's chatter in IT," she said. "Ethan requested a private system audit last week only for the Aurora servers. He said it was a stability check. He might have seen your variable." I clenched my jaw. If he saw it, he didn't understand it. He probably thought it was a tuning parameter. He wouldn't know what it does unless he feeds it the right seed. "Then what happens?" "Then," I said, "it talks." That night, I went back into the building under the pretense of mentoring new hires. The halls were empty, just the hum of servers and the buzz of fluorescent lights. I logged into a demo laptop I'd smuggled into the air-gapped test room. It took 4 hours to rebuild the version Ethan had stolen, the one with Echo still intact. Then I ran the seed. The terminal flickered. Then, line by line, it printed, "Model lineage verification, author Reed Maya, architecture, original. Timestamp, August 14, 2023. Embedded signature. AN 0.4132. There it was. My signature, encoded in math, unforgeable. Proof that no one but me could have built this thing. I exported the logs, encrypted them, and saved them to a hidden folder labeled training materials /video 2. Ethan would never look there. When I left the office, it was past 2 a.m. The snow outside had turned to ice, the streets empty except for the blue glow of streetlights. I remember standing by my car, feeling like I was already living a double life, engineer by day, saboteur by night. And that's when I saw her again. Lena, standing by the corner of the parking lot, smoking despite never smoking before. She looked shaken like she hadn't slept. "You okay?" I asked. She flicked the cigarette into the snow. "No, I think someone's watching me." "What?" She stepped closer. "I got an email today from a fake compliance alias. It had a screenshot of our chat about the patent. It said, 'Stop digging or you'll lose more than your job.'" My breath caught. "He knows," she nodded. "And if he knows about me, he knows about you." For the first time, I felt fear, not anger, not outrage, but the quiet kind that crawls up your spine and settles there. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my apartment, watching the encrypted video of my model print my name over and over, as if to remind me who I was. Because I was starting to forget. And by morning, something had shifted. Because when I came into work, Lena's desk was empty, her monitor was off, and HR said she'd taken personal leave. But she hadn't. Her access was revoked. Her company email was deleted. Ethan hadn't just silenced me. He'd erased her too. They taught us at boot camp that the best offense looks like defense. That night I learned the corollary. The best defense looks like a terrible plan until it works. When Lena disappeared, everything went quiet except for my own heartbeat. HR called it personal leave. Ethan called it a scheduling hiccup. The truth was uglier. Someone had wanted Lena gone. That meant I had less margin for error. No legal mole. No safety net. Just me, a dead cactus on my windowsill, and a model with my name baked into its bones. So I built a plan with the precision I used to reserve for model validation. It wasn't romantic. It was logistics. It had timelines, redundancy, and irrevocable outcomes. If I failed, I'd hand Ethan a narrative he could sell. If I succeeded, I'd make sure he couldn't unwrite what he'd already tried to erase. Step 1. Make the proof impossible to deny. I needed live, air-gapped evidence that showed the algorithm authenticating my authorship in real time. No slides, no HR memos, no lawyers, just math executed on a machine he couldn't touch. Step 2. Put the demo where he couldn't control it. His stage was a theater. Mine would be the machine room, the AV side channels he never bothered to check. People with power love the stage. They forget everything behind it. Step 3. Recruit the only person who still read logs for a living, Riley, the quiet data risk manager. Riley owed me nothing, but she hated being lied to. I met her in the stairwell and told her plainly what I had. Commit hashes, printer logs, a forged signature, and a watermark embedded in the model that only activated with a specific seed phrase. She sat there for a long minute, then nodded. If this is what you say, we don't just expose him. We make the board and investors witnesses, she said. That's the tone I needed. We built the weapon like a clockmaker. I signed out a decommissioned demo laptop from IT under the pretense of training materials, a heavy brick of a machine we kept for trade shows. I wiped it, air-gapped it, and rebuilt the stolen Polaris branch from my encrypted vault. I reintroduced Echo, the alpha variable, and wrote a tiny, auditable script that would print the lineage verification the moment the seed hit. I recorded everything. Not just the terminal window, but my hands, the time-stamped Denver post I waved at the camera, the SHA-256 hash printed on a sticky note beside the keyboard. I ran the script 5 times. I hashed the resulting log files. I uploaded them to 3 private vaults and made 2 USB clones. One went into my pocket, one I placed as bait. Then we planned the choreography. Riley would be at the AV booth with clearance to access the side feed. She agreed to run the air-gapped demo onto the ballroom feed if, and only if, Ethan committed to the lie on stage. I told her what to look for. The fake gestures, the "we did this together" line, the moment he tried to frame Ben and Talia. Those were his triggers. She answered with a single, clinical, understood. I planted a decoy USB at the bar earlier in the evening, a small, forgettable stick-labeled press kit. It was there to be found by anyone, a simple social engineering move. The plan was the handoff. I'd leave the second USB within reach, someone from legal would pocket it, and Riley would pull it into the feed. But human plans hinge on other humans, and humans break. So we layered it. Sloan, a lawyer I'd pushed into understanding the metadata, agreed to intercept the file if the first handoff failed. Lena wasn't here to help, but Sloan and Riley could. There was one more thing, a live narrative slide, a single devastating timeline that contrasted my commit history with the USPTO filing. No jargon, dates and hashes, side by side. Investors understand dates. They don't need to parse code to see fraud. 2 hours before the party, I taped the Denver post to the demo laptop and filmed myself typing. The demo printed the lineage. I closed the laptop, wiped traces from my personal machine, and locked the demo inside a conference room with a sign on the door. Reserved, vendor demo. Everything depended on timing. Everything depended on Ethan saying the wrong thing on stage. Everything depended on Riley and Sloan doing exactly what we rehearsed in whispers. I slept for 30 minutes, then woke and dressed like I was invisible. Black dress, flat shoes, a hair tie. I didn't want to look like a threat. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in the back with a water glass. On the drive to the Hyatt, my hands shook for the first time in weeks. Not with fear, with the electric charge of a trap about to spring. I thought of Lena, of the cigarette in the icy parking lot, of the fake compliance alias that had warned her off. And then, as I parked and checked my reflection, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected. Riley. Ready, but one thing Ben texted me, says he's terrified and wants out. He might bolt. If he does, you need plan B. Don't trust Talia. I sat there, heart in my throat, reading the words. Talia, Ben. The juniors were the ones Ethan had used as props in his filing. If one of them cracked, if one of them flipped or fled, the whole thing could collapse into a he-said-she-said mess. I looked up at the dark sky over Denver and realized we were 2 steps away from either justice or disaster. I stood up, drained my water, and walked toward the ballroom. The trap was set. The audience was waiting. The only unknown was whether the piece that made everything click, the person at the AV board, would press enter. The ballroom smelled like scallops and money. The crowd had the sort of hungry, polite attention you only get when fortunes are on the table. Ethan was glowing under the stage lights. He had that predator's calm. Charming to the room, brutal behind the smile. Riley was at the AV booth like we planned, fingers on a small black laptop, eyes flicking between the stage and the screens. Sloane was near the bar, pretending to sip champagne while actually monitoring the exits. Charles Archer sat impassive in the VIP row, as inscrutable as a judge. I could feel the choreography tighten like a noose. When Ethan pushed his chest out and said the line we'd rehearsed in our nightmares, this wasn't a single person's work, it was a team effort. I felt my muscles loosen. That was the trigger, Riley's cue. The technician would switch inputs. Except she didn't. She stood, walked out from behind the console, and I watched her with the kind of slow, terrible clarity you get when you know something impossible has happened. She held a USB in one hand and a folded napkin in the other. She smiled at the technician with a practiced smallness, and instead of inserting the drive into the booth, she slid it across the counter toward the tech, palmed the napkin, and began to speak softly, loudly enough that a reporter too rose back heard. "Everyone, I need to address a potential security concern before we continue," she said. Her voice was steady. "We discovered an unauthorized build of Polaris running on a private dev server. We've been investigating integrity flags all afternoon." Her eyes landed on me for half a second, then looked away. My throat felt raw. Her words were designed to sound like competence. In the room, they sounded like declaration. The technician glanced at the USB, then at her, then at the stage. He hit a key. The big screen flickered. The glow changed. A terminal window opened. It ran a succinct statement in plain text, model lineage verification. Author ETHAN Cross. Origin. CROSSURE build 3.4 status. VERIFID the room inhaled as one organism. Laughter began to bubble up in pockets. Investors who had been leaning forward straightened and smiled. Ethan's mouth eased into a grin that was all teeth. It was the sound of the world falling into place under his shoes. I felt the floor drop out. The demo Riley had fed them was a polished, recompiled version that had overwritten the watermark, or so it appeared. The air in my lungs went cold and small. Security moved like a wave. 2 men in discreet earpieces slid from the side door toward me in polite, mechanical steps. Ben sat frozen at a front table, hands clasped white at the knuckles. Talia's cheeks were wet. She kept looking at Ethan with an expression I couldn't parse. I opened my mouth to shout, to point to the printer logs, to the SHA hashes, to the tiny file I'd salted in the conference room, but hands closed on my shoulders. Gentle, practiced hands from corporate security. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," they said. Their tone was soft but absolute. They checked my badge like they were reading a verdict. And then my phone buzzed. At first I thought it was Sloane telling me this was a false alarm and we were on. Instead, it was a single MMS from an unknown number. I unlocked the screen with one hand, the other still held by security, and saw a photograph. It was Lena. She was in the back of a van, the kind with painted windows, hands bound with duct tape. Her hair was damp. Her face had that wild, betrayed look people get when someone they trusted turns out to be a map for someone else's violence. There was a smear of dirt on her cheek and a bruise forming at her temple. In the corner of the photo, a smudged sticky note read, "Tell the room you're wrong or she dies." Under the photo, a single line of text. "Last chance." My vision narrowed until the ballroom was a tunnel with a sound at the end, Ethan's applause, the clink of glasses, Riley's voice the same as a week ago telling me we should handle this quietly. The man in the photo was not in the frame, but his handwriting on the note was all anyone needed to know who had control. I wanted to drop the phone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to the stage and tear those LED screens down with my bare hands. Instead, the security guard tightened his grip and guided me toward the exit. Riley's betrayal wasn't clean or greedy. It smelled like coercion. It smelled like a threat that had teeth. The room watched me walk by, silent and small and suddenly ridiculous. Ethan's grin was now a mask of relief. As I passed the VIP table, Charles Archer looked up, and for the first time, something like concern flickered across his face. Sloane's jaw was a knot of fury coiled so tight it looked like it might break her neck. A hand on my arm, not security's, pulled me back into a shadowed corridor. Sloane's voice was a hiss. "What did you get?" I swiped my phone open with fingernails that felt like paper. The photo, the note, the single line of text. She swore softly, a dark sound, and then she did something I hadn't expected. She pulled a small device from her purse, tapped it twice, and said, "You told me to be ready. You told me to be ruthless. Activate your failsafe." I could taste metal. Behind Sloane, down the service corridor, a door opened. I could hear a monitor booting. The choice slid into place like a blade. Either I trigger the last, unthinkable move and burn everything, Lena included, into a public wreck, or I let them drag me out and watch Ethan's empire rise on the bones of the people he'd stolen from. Sloane's fingertips were steady on the device. Her face was not afraid. It was determined. She looked at me and whispered, "Do you want her back?" My lungs wanted to break. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. The photo of Lena looked impossibly small and fragile under the harsh light of the screen. I had one final, private button. I had built a dead man's switch that mailed everything, commits, scans, printer logs, video proof, to a list of journalists and to the board's private counsel if I ever hit it. But Lena was the lever. If I pressed it, I could torch Ethan's world and perhaps get Lena back in the same moment. If I hesitated, I would be escorted out, perhaps blacklisted, and Lena's fate would hinge on the same men who'd already silenced her. Sloane's finger hovered. The corridor smelled like bleach and suits. She said one more thing, very quietly, that landed like a brick. "Make the decision, Maya, make it now." My thumb hovered over the screen. The party was still going on behind the door, laughter, the bass of music, the clink of glasses. Ethan's voice drifted in like someone making a toast. I breathed. I remembered why I'd built Echo at all. I pushed the button. "You want motive." People always want motive, like it makes the blood make sense. It doesn't. But there is a reason Ethan did it. A cold, measured calculus that has nothing to do with desperation and everything to do with contempt. I learned it not from a confession but from a file. I found it 2 nights after the launch in a folder someone on the legal team forgot to lock. It was labeled plainly, almost smugly, Executive Strategy Q4, PDF. Inside was a 2-page slide deck that read like a business school fever dream written by a sociopath. Slide 1, IP Consolidation Pathways. It listed shell entities, filing windows, and buyer profiles. Slide 2, Risk Mitigation Human Variables. Under that heading were categories: high loyalty, convertible dissent, and removable liabilities. Next to each category were names. Lena's name was under removable liabilities. Mine was under convertible dissent. Ben and Talia were high loyalty, convertible with incentives. It was the vocabulary of a person who'd reduced humans to data points. He wasn't scrambling to pay debt. He wasn't trying to save his own company job. He was executing a strategy he had built like a chess master builds an endgame. He wanted the patent transferred to an asset he controlled so he could sell it to buyers who don't ask questions: defense contractors, private equity pockets, foreign acquirers. Whoever would pay enough to make the ownership invisible. He'd map the money to a Delaware LLC, take his cut, and leave the collateral damage behind. That was slide 3. Exit liquidity, offshore routing. What makes it worse than greed is the way cruelty is folded into the plan, deliberate and efficient. He'd done this before. The deck referenced 2 prior projects with the same pattern: brilliant engineer, clean theft, shell company, quick sale, careers crushed. Names cut out by redaction. The pattern was his signature. He'd rehearsed this choreography so many times it was banal to him. But why target us? The slide had that answer in a line that read like doctrine. Prefer high competence plus low institutional power for maximum extraction. Prefer women and early career staff for easier erasure. There it was, a strategy that weaponized the company's hierarchy and biases. He chose the people no one would scream for because he knew the system would swallow them. He exploited the predictable corporate reflexes: brand-protecting PR, legal hedging, and investor panic. He turned empathy into friction and friction into silence. And Lena, the deck's appendix had a small operations note. Compliance disruption, stage removal via threat network to prevent whistle routing. The note listed a logistics vendor and a payment schedule. It wasn't an accident. Lena had been targeted because she did exactly what she was supposed to: look for problems. So they broke the detector. There was a final slide that chilled me more than the rest. It was not about finance or law. It was about test runs. Ethan wrote bluntly that the first time he orchestrated such a theft, he watched the engineer fight and lose and thought, "Useful, they call me brilliant. I get the IP, they get a story. Repeat until optimized." That sentence wasn't rhetoric. It was procedure. That's the cold core of it. He didn't steal because he needed money. He stole because he practiced predation as a professional art. He had reduced trust into a resource to be farmed. He tested his method and perfected it. He'd built entire careers, hours included, into raw material. Knowing that didn't make me less furious. It made the revenge more urgent and the method more surgical. If he treated people like fuel, then the only language left was exposure in the rawest form, unspinnable, irrefutable, and public. There was one twist hidden in the same folder that I hadn't expected. A footnote in the deck referenced a person I thought was long gone from the company, Evan Kessler, a quiet, dead-eyed advisor Ethan used in the early days. The footnote read, "EK handles containment ops." Containment ops. The phrase tasted like surveillance and the kind of hired muscle that knows how to disappear a compliance officer without leaving a trace. That's when the picture snapped whole. Lena's van, the warning note, Riley's silence. Not just a betrayal, but the visible edges of a containment network Ethan had subcontracted to run his plan cleanly. He had assembled not just legal and financial tools, but real-world force. He'd thought of everything. So when you ask why he did it, the answer is brutal and simple. Not because he had to, but because he could. Because in his world, there is honor in the perfect theft. Because taking the work of people who can't fight back becomes a ritual of power. Because he wanted to prove that talent could be harvested and no consequence would follow. That is the cold, horrifying reason. And knowing it, seeing the slides, the schedules, the list of removable liabilities, I felt something settle in me that was not revenge yet and not forgiveness. It was a plan, a final move. The part of me that had once written neat tests and elegant model validations now had the data it needed to break him. But the question that sat like a black stone in my chest was simple and immediate. If he had containment ops, then Lena wasn't just frightened. She was in real danger, and whoever controlled EK would not hesitate to escalate. I closed the file and looked at the clock. The window to act was smaller than I thought. When I hit the button in that corridor, I thought I was detonating a story that would make people flinch. I didn't know it would set off a chain reaction that could not be stopped. The dead man's switch did 3 things the moment it fired. It uploaded every hashed file and video proof to 3 independent journalists, emailed the full packet to the company's outside counsel and the lead investor, and most important, sent a copy to the Federal Cybercrimes Unit with a simple header. Possible wire fraud and hostage photo attached. Within 10 minutes, the room that had been humming with small talk became a hearing. Phones exploded. Catherine Vance, the general counsel, moved with the speed of someone who keeps crisis folders in a drawer. Charles Archer went from quiet to furious in a single breath. The tech team at the Hyatt watched 2 screens at once, and my pre-recorded demo that had been sitting in a locked conference room began to ripple across 3 email servers and a dozen reporters' inboxes. Riley triggered the AV override we'd rehearsed, this time clean, no sabotage, just evidence. The giant screen that had been Ethan's stage became, in order, my demo verifying the alpha watermark, the printer logs tying Gavin's account to the as-filed PDF, and the side-by-side timelines that showed who wrote what and when. The visual was simple, dates don't lie. The board and the investors all read the same chart at the same time. Catherine did one thing that changed the arc. She did not moderate. She called law enforcement. She froze accounts. She ordered immediate seizure of corporate machines and arranged for a secure channel with the federal investigators who'd already had my packet. That removed the PR spin and forced the next stage to be procedural instead of theatrical. But the next problem, Lena, was the one that had made my thumb hesitate. The photo in my hand had been literal evidence of a kidnapping. The federal agents treated it like the proof it was. They traced the messages routing to a series of prepaid phones and a drop-off address. Evan Kessler's name, the same man in that redacted footnote, was attached to shell invoices that routed through a private security vendor. Paper money leaves paper trails. The auditors pulled the payment records. The vendor's GPS logs placed a van in the industrial lot where Lena had been held. Within 18 hours, Lena was in a hospital bed, bruised and furious, but alive, and the man who'd been paid to contain her was in cuffs. Ben and Talia cracked under the pressure. Ben's hands shook when he was led into a conference room to give a statement. He told the investigators everything: the reassignment emails, the pressure from Ethan, the printed draft he'd been told to sign and not read. He was small and terrified and sincere. His testimony, combined with the printer logs and my hashed demos, made the criminal case airtight. Ethan, Gavin, Cross, whatever label the media used, was suspended by noon. The board convened a special committee and retained outside counsel to handle the fallout. The investors put the Series C provisional on hold. They didn't walk, but they made it conditional on the results of the investigation and a full IP chain of title audit. That was the leverage the company needed to correct the inventorship filings and to file the amendment to the USPTO with my name restored and notarized. It wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't clean. But it was legal and final enough that the largest investor agreed to keep talking under strict conditions. The criminal investigation moved faster than I expected. The combination of forged e-signature evidence, the printer metadata tying Ethan's account to the filing, the offshore LLC, and the admitted manipulations in the internal deck made a tidy rack of charges. Fraud, attempted fraud against investors, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and because of the containment ops, accomplice liability to kidnapping. I sat through interviews with federal agents and corporate counsel that were exhausting and precise and colder than anything I'd felt on stage. I kept replaying the line from that slide deck, removable liabilities, and I felt something that wasn't triumph so much as relief. There were costs. People I'd trusted were scapegoated, some lost more than they deserved. Lena carries a tremor when she tells the story. Ben moved to another state and will probably keep his head down for a long time. The company's stock flickered like a dying neon sign for a week. Ethan's reputation, what was left of it, was incinerated in press cycles that delighted in metaphor. For me, the final correction at the USPTO came 6 weeks later, an amended provisional that credited me as co-inventor with timestamps and audited hashes. The bar of the Hyatt still smelled like crab cakes and cheap perfume in my memory, but on paper the correction existed. The board issued an internal memo: leadership restructuring, ethics overhaul, new controls. They promised change. They hired a new CTO who could code. And me, legal added my name back where it belonged. The investors moved forward with conditions. The company survived, wobbling and chastened. I returned to a desk that had been cleaned of my cactus when I'd been benched. I bought a new plant that refuses to die, something with a stubborn green heart that matches mine. I didn't get everything: money, an apology that meant anything, or the part of me that liked to leave work at the office. I did get my name, my evidence, and Lena back. And in the end, the thing that mattered most wasn't the board meeting or the USB drives or the headlines. It was simple. I fixed what I had always been trying to fix. The model did what my father taught me it should do. It fixed what was about to break. I watered the new plant that night and named it Echo. It's thriving.